Hello coders, today I'm with William A. Ibarra. He runs aviatorservices.com. We're going to be talking about the website, how it was built, all the technical bits behind the website. I actually met William at Sunshine PHP in Miami, the conference that I was at a couple of weeks ago. William, welcome to the show. Have you had a good week?
I have. Thank you so much for having me.
No worries.
Yeah, I look forward to talking with you.
Yeah. We actually met at Sunshine PHP over a coffee. And we were talking about what you get up to in your aviatorservices.com. And I thought it was absolutely fascinating to hear how you put that together, the services that you provide, and that you were actually at that conference learning stuff, which was awesome. How did you find the conference?
Well, the conference, I found it from, I'm a member of the PHP Miami meetup, or they have actually a South Florida PHP group.
Okay.
And I was trying to get to know developers and learn myself more about, the code. So I signed up, I went to a few meetings, and I saw that Adam Culp was running it. They were doing it up north in Boca Raton only, which is kind of far from me. It's about an hour away. And I said, hey, can you do one in Miami? And he ended up finding someone in Miami that can run it. So I went to a few of those meetings, and then that's how I found out about the Sunshine PHP, that they have it every year here.
That's awesome. And do you go there? Do you go there fairly regularly?
Well, this year was my second time.
Right.
And even though I'm not a professional developer, I'm somewhat of an amateur, but I have learned, the code. I practice it, and it's helped me a great deal. So I can talk to developers in my project and that sort of thing. And even though the conference is really high level, I still get a lot out of it. The conference is not all about purely coding or technical aspects. A lot of it deals with the overall. There's a lot of business information as well, and experiences, and there's a lot of smart people I meet there. So that's another thing I really like about it.
Yeah, this is what I keep saying about user groups and conferences. It's it's the people you meet and the networking opportunities that you get, not just about the code, but also about the business side of things. Because writing code is one thing, but actually producing a website that actually does something, in your case, makes you money for your what you like to do, your aviatorservices.com. That's a whole different kettle of fish. It's a different mindset. So you said that you write some of the code yourself, or you have knowledge of the code base at least. How much of that do you have?
Well, I do have knowledge of the code base, and I follow it. Certainly on the things like GitHub, and so I'm familiar overall. I don't develop the code myself, but I work very closely directly with the developers that have helped me. I've had various ones. I remember I started this a long time ago, and it was very frustrating in the beginning. But later on, when I learned the code and how software is developed, how hard it is, I got a new appreciation for it. And then I got involved with the local tech community in Miami, which is quite good. And I met people through there, and so far it's gone well. So I don't do it myself, but I do work very closely. I designed the whole project.
Wow.
In terms of how it's supposed to do, what it's supposed to do. And then I took some good advice from some very good people down here.
Excellent. So how long have you been doing this for?
Well, the first version of the site, I would say, probably came up about 4 years ago, which is we had the first version.
Right.
That's the one that actually went live. Prior to that, I did have a site that I was actually using for several years. Basically what the site does is it provides it's about on-demand air travel. If you ever fly in a private airplane. And you're able to go to the site, check availability, pricing, and book online. And that's I'll get into that more later. That's not easy to do, but that's how I got started initially. So we had the first site that I was actually using just for quoting for my own internal. People would call me, and I would give them, and I would use the app for that. Then later on, the goal was to get it online. So we did that. With the first version, but that was somewhat of a mishmash of technologies, and it was not something I could really scale from there. So, but it worked. You can go online, you can put your credit card, you can check pricing, availability, and it worked quite well. So that was the first version. So I'd say it's been online about 4 years.
I noticed that you also take Bitcoin.
Yes.
How many versions did you have before that happened?
By versions, you mean what? Versions of what?
As in of the website.
Well, the Bitcoin right now, even though I accept it right now, originally it's a little challenging, at least for me. And initially, it was through a Coinbase widget.
Right.
So surprisingly, I'll get into this in a moment, but the few Bitcoin transactions I have done have been outside the widget because the downside of that is Coinbase requires you to sign up and have an account. And that's obviously how they gain users. But that's somewhat of a downside. The people that have Bitcoin don't, probably most of them, although Coinbase has gotten huge, a lot of the early adopters, don't have their Bitcoin on Coinbase for a lot of reasons that I can get into. But so they have to pay me outside of that. So it's something I got into early on. I like the technology. I got into it specifically because it has some unique properties that are very good for my particular business and industry. A lot of times now, I'll get into the volatility in a moment. But but the fact that in my business, using credit cards are very expensive and they're risky. To charter an airplane, even a small one, you're usually dealing with large dollar amounts, and you have chargeback risk. You have, you have these issues. Whereas a Bitcoin, and then if you book flights on the weekend, if it's someone you don't know, normally you wire transfer funds. You can't do that on the weekend. You run into these issues that the Bitcoin was very attractive to me because I said, wow, if someone could email me the funds in Bitcoin, I get it immediately, it's done, and there's no more else. So that was the interest in it.
So there's the convenience factor of having Bitcoin. Yeah.
Absolutely, sure.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, and initially, when I first started, it was a period when I first got into it. It was actually only about there was a period of about 4 years, and it was actually quite stable before the last year's insanity and the volatility. So it was actually for a number of years when I got into it. It was actually quite stable. It didn't. It wasn't that volatile.
Okay. And how are you coping with the volatility at the moment?
Well, right now, it's very risky. It is risky right now, but I do very few of the transactions. I've actually tried to encourage the use of it in the community. I put it on Twitter. My Twitter handle's at Aviator Services, by the way. So I put it on my Twitter handle that I accepted. I put it on my Instagram, also at Aviator Services.
Right.
So I have a lot of the people in the community follow me and so forth, but I don't do many transactions. So a lot of it is somewhat of a risk. Since I use it in my small airplane, if it's, I'm willing to accept a few $1,000s of risk here and there to accept it because I think it'll be, I'm a believer in it. I think it'll be very valuable in the future. And I follow the developments in it. So I think in terms of a payment transaction, or in terms of a payment method, I think it's very good.
What are the core benefits of using Bitcoin? Do you think?
Well, again, initially it was if you get away from all this risk like that you do with credit cards. Although I've had very few chargeback issues with a credit card. There are fees. There are high fees.
Right.
And there's always that risk of a chargeback. Whereas it's very convenient. If someone pays you in Bitcoin, they transmit them to you. You have them. It's like a cash. It's like someone paying you in cash. It's there. I don't have to worry about it. There are no, especially now in the development of the Lightning Network and everything else. The fees are so minimal, and it's instant.
What's the Lightning Network? You'll have to excuse my.
The Lightning Network is some new development that's going on. The problem, I don't want to get in too deep, but the problem with Bitcoin, the whole scaling of debate was the block size, and if you increase the block size, the whole idea is that you download the whole transaction history, and if the block size is too big, then you need a more storage capacity, because basically the ledger of every Bitcoin transaction is downloaded by thousands of computers. You can do it if you can run a node on any machine, but there's gigabytes of data that you have to download, all the transaction history. So if you have a lot of if the block sizes are very high, it's people need more storage and more computer, more cost to do it, and that takes away its security, etc. So anyway, there's another layer. The way the experts mention it, it's very similar to the internet when it first started. That we had, all the protocols that allowed for email and videos, and these are basically layers on top of it, which have built the web to a point where you and I can have this conversation online, so that's what the Lightning Network is. It's another layer that'll allow instant, almost free transactions.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
but again, that's not, but unfortunately, getting back to the app, I do not accept it through the app right now. That's another feature I'm going to be adding, but right now you'd have to contact me and do it around it.
So are you talking about the website, or do you have a mobile app yourself?
No, I mean the website. I'm sorry.
The website. Cool.
Yeah. I do not have a mobile app for this project.
So, in terms of Bitcoin, do you see Bitcoin being used in other places, like not e-commerce, but I don't know, how we do our voting and all of that stuff? Is there any room for Bitcoin in those areas?
I've heard of that. There's a lot of projects in that. I don't know much about those, but yeah, I know that there's that in the community there's a lot of people that are a lot of projects. Okay. Down the road where they can do voting, identity, and any sort of I think there's some companies, Factum is one of them. They're working in Central America to be able to store, to record title, land titles in all these countries with, very weak institutions that, governments can erase or remove title data. And that, of course, affects wealth creation, in the West. That's why we all, because you can define everything on a piece of paper, a title that you can own something and it's defended in courts and so forth. So those are the projects. I don't know much about them other than I just follow them superficially.
Fair enough. That's really, really interesting. I haven't thought of it in that sense of using it for land titles and things. But yeah, you could imagine that there would be a bunch of uses, especially outside of e-commerce for that. Right. Okay, so going back to the Aviator Services site, is there what other technologies? Can you talk about the other technologies that the website currently uses, or can you at least talk about some of the technologies that used to be used on the website?
Right. Well, the website, I mean, it uses it's all PHP. Of course, we have under a framework, and then it originally it was somewhat it was really mostly written in JavaScript. Okay. The problem with that is that it exposes a lot of your code So right now we decided that wasn't a good solution, and then there were some other aspects of it for scaling. So we decided to do it. Basically, everything is done through the server, and then right now I just have some. There are some JavaScript elements that are used, but it's almost entirely in PHP.
In PHP.
Yeah.
Does that include the blog as well? Because the
blog, yes. Yeah. Everything included.
I noticed that the blog is really, really quick. And you say,
oh, really?
Yeah, you say scaling. What challenges have you faced with scaling this site?
Well, I mean that more for future development than I do now. Okay. What I'd like to do in the future is I'm working on a version. I have some other companies like mine that want to use to have the same functionality.
Okay.
That's what I mean by that. So you can have kind of the basic framework or structure, and then from there be able to, to scale it from there.
So you're kind of future-proofing it in that sense, making it
ready
exactly. for the cloud.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So there's a search facility on
right.
that. Can you explain what that search does to the audience?
Sure, exactly. Well, what the way it's designed is if you are, I'm not quite sure how much of the audience understands basically on-demand air travel. As we know, you can book anyone can book an airline ticket,
right,
to go from point A to point B on your phone using any number of apps, and they tie into all these global distribution systems, Amadeus or what have you. Mm-hmm. And however, for private airplanes, it's especially in the United States. There's a lot of small operators, independent operators. There's a few thousand of us in the United States operating about roughly 11,000 airplanes of every size. It could be from a small piston airplane like mine to a private jet to a bush plane in Alaska. Right. Wow. So it varies. People tend to associate it too much with, if you're unfamiliar, maybe the private jets of the rich and famous, but that's actually one small aspect. There's a more practical aspect of it, and something that will affect all of us in the future, especially with the development of some future technologies and the electrification of propulsion and so forth. So there's a lot of stuff in the future. But for example, what the app does, you would go there, you would select an airport, and the departure airport, your arrival airport, it'll check that when you click you put a date and time that you want to go. And this is all on-demand air travel is kind of like custom air travel. You're flying when you want. That's the whole purpose. Yes. Someone would use us because a lot of times it might be cheaper to use an airline ticket, but it might take you, 2 days to do a trip where I can do for you in half a day. I can fly you to a location, especially a remote location, and bring you back. A lot of my clients use me for that. It's the time savings, efficiency, and so forth. So anyway, sure. You select your airport, you select your departure date and time, and it instantly will calculate a price and let you know if it's available or not. And then you can book it on the spot. And if you know anything about our industry, that doesn't happen so easily. And normally you have to call someone or email or do a search online, and everything is still done through emails and so forth. So it just speeds up the workflow for the user. So the user can go there, and if someone, as you know, you want to remove the barriers to entry for someone to consider your product, or in our case, our service. Yeah. Okay,
cool. That sounds interesting. And you must have to poll, I'm just guessing now, but you must have to sort of poll availability off of somewhere. No.
No, the way it actually works, availability in, like I operate a very specific airplane, a small three-place airplane called the Cirrus SR-22. So it's meant for, so I have a very, very a specific area that I operate, which is in the southeast United States. I cover all of Florida.
Okay.
So you would fly, so people, when they would book a flight, it would be to go from somewhere in Florida for a business meeting, and you want to come back quickly. So the app, if someone books a flight already and then you try to book a flight on the time that the airplane was already taken, it won't let you do that.
Right.
So and I basically set a schedule in the back end, and then it allows you to book within that schedule. And, assuming there wasn't any flights booked previously at a particular time slot, it does all that to avoid conflicts and schedule conflicts.
Okay. Now, I don't know much about any of this, to be honest. I've never taken a private plane myself. Do you have to sort of book the runway or for an allocated period of time to actually land? Is there anything that you have to do sort of post-flight to acknowledge that you're actually going to go to that particular place and get permission to go there?
No, not at all. I don't need to do anything. It's I will say in Europe it's quite a bit more restrictive, which is why the general aviation industry in Europe is very, very small compared to in the United States, which has a history of a lot of it's very easy to fly here. That's why, so there's quite a large industry. There are thousands of airports everywhere. For example, only about 10% in the U.S., 10% of the airports, of the available airports, are used by the airlines. So you can imagine there's 5,000 airports, it's about 500 of them are used by the airlines. So just to give you an idea of what's out there, from every small little airport, almost every community. Florida is also a little unique in that Florida has the added advantage of during World War II, because of the weather here, all over Florida was used as a major training base for pilots. So, the RAF trained here tremendously all over, Florida. So Florida, almost every tiny little town, believe it or not, has a big airport, has a big runway, I should say, that's a municipal airport, and many of them, and oftentimes they're quite large. So there's a lot of airports that you can use and access, that you can access here in Florida and other states as well. Florida in particular has that advantage.
I never knew that. That's wow. 10%. That's insane. So I'm guessing from what I'm hearing, you also fly. Is that correct?
I am a pilot. Yes, that's pilot. I'm a pilot by training. I'm an air charter operator. Right. So that's my business, and so that's what I've been involved with for a big part of my life, over 25 years. So yeah, I am a pilot by training. So I do fly the airplane myself.
Was flying a hobby at the start and then it turned into a business, or was programming or web development a hobby and then that sort of manifested? How did you get involved in this and merge the two together?
The interest, I've always had a long-term interest in technology. I would say I regret not learning to code earlier, but I didn't know. So I wish I would have. But from very early on, I was always interested in technology and airplanes. If you're, I view the aviation as the original high tech industry. And, now when we say tech, it's more software. But so I was always very interested early on. I was tinkering with the internet before there were browsers. So, and playing around with that so I always had that early interest. And then just as the years went on, then I kind of got more focused on my flying career and so forth. And I put that aside, but I was always kind of drawn back to it. And I learned from the obstacles in my business how they could be streamlined, how you can automate a lot of tasks that I think really limit your business. To make it easy for people to be able to access and to see if it's right for them. The idea of the site also is for most people won't make a phone call or an email and wait, but you can go to the site and play with it and see if you can check a pricing, availability, and
I guess see
what it's about.
I guess in this sort of age of Uber and Lyft and all of that stuff where you want on-demand transport. Where was I? I was in some city the other day, and I knew it was about to start to rain, and I was making that decision as to should I get an Uber, and I just wanted to see the cost and the availability, and I didn't actually commit to the transaction. I just decided to walk it. But I wanted to have that ability to see if it was available. And there is this availability now that we never really used to have, because you would beforehand, you would just call someone up and say, can I have a taxi for such and such? Or in the sense of flying, it would be having to book well in advance for things. But I guess you're sort of bringing the convenience now, especially with the whole Bitcoin, where people can actually just buy it on their phone. That's fantastic. So yeah, I totally get what you're saying, that you were really interested in tech and flying, and you brought them together. That's quite a fascinating story. You were saying that you worked with the internet before browsers. Can I sort of ask what kind of stuff you were doing with that kind of bits and pieces?
Sure. I'll give you an example. Coincidentally, and this is interesting because it does tie into the app. Believe it or not, back in the mid 1990s, I remember reading an article. This is one of those funny stories that there was an article in the Miami Herald about a 17-year-old high school kid whose dad somehow loaned him $100,000 to connect to this thing with the internet, and he did it out of his garage, and he was selling subscriptions for $17 a month. And I said, wow, I thought that was cool, and I actually called, and he was like one of the first ISPs down here. And then I signed up for it, and I was paying $17 a month, and I got on with a dial-up, a modem, and I thought that was cool. And you'd go to a bunch of, it was just like a monochrome screen, and I think they did have links back then. I remember this, for some reason, what intrigued me was the CIA site. The CIA had a list of information site for the countries. For some reason, I thought that was amazing. But anyway, so I did that, and then then you got a faster modem connection. Then coincidentally, I met another friend of mine who was a pilot, who he started another ISP called Shadow Information Services, one of the very first ones here in Miami, and he was excuse me one second.
No worries.
He was a pilot as well that I trained. He bought an airplane, and I gave him training in that, and so I signed on with him. And he actually, I said to him back then, "Can you?" Hey, it's a real pain for people when I'm not around. Can you build something for me that can allow people to check pricing and availability online? And back then, this was before Google Maps, so I actually had to find there was no map like you can see a map now if you use our app, but which is common. But I had to find the calculation for great circle distance between two lat long points, which was an involved math problem, and then they had to program it, and they did, and I actually had that on a site in 1999 that was actually on the web, and it would work. You couldn't book online, you couldn't put a credit card, but I did have that on my website And then other things happened that I got distracted. So it's something I did. So I had that interest. And then getting back to your question, I realize this is a long time ago, but I remember one of the Unix programs they had called Pine, which was an early chat program. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but my soon-to-be wife at the time was in Washington, D.C., going to school out there, and we literally, I remember we chatted, in real time.
Right.
So that was like a big deal.
Yeah.
I thought that was fascinating. So I did those kinds of things that they were pretty neat. And I did try some voice over IP very early on. You would just find random people and you'd spend half your time. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, I can hear you.
A bit like the start of this podcast.
It was. Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of funny. So I look back at it now. So I always had an early interest.
Yeah.
I do. So yeah, I have an early early interest. In it. Yeah,
that's a fascinating story. That really is. That's I love hearing how the ideas developed and manifested from early on, because from early on you probably didn't have the idea of doing what you're doing today, but
that's right.
It stemmed from that. Which I find personally, I just find fascinating when I talk to people. But look, I know that you're a super busy guy. But is there anything that you want to discuss? Anything you want to add before we wrap up? Do you have any social media links that you want to mention, or anything else?
Sure. Well, you can visit my website at aviatorservices.com, and you can get me on Twitter also at Aviator Services, and the same for Instagram. And I'm always open to talking to people about this technology and anything else, and about on-demand air travel, which I think in the future, you may not realize it now, kind of like the early internet, but I think aviation, will touch everyone at some point in the future as this develops. Yeah,
it's very interesting. Very, very interesting. Well, I'll leave all of the links that you've mentioned, all of your social media accounts, in the show notes below. On YouTube, I'll put an overlay on the screen, and on the podcast, it'll be in the normal show notes. But thank you ever so much, William, for coming on the show and talking about what you do. That's aviatorservices.com. And thanks everyone for watching or listening on the podcast. Happy coding, everyone. I'll see you again soon. Cheers. Bye.